So hello again everyone. Today we are going to talk about naman science education. Now most if not all of what we are going to talk about today can be found here in the book Philosophy, Science, Education and Culture by Nola and Irzik. They've already covered naman all of the topics, so that's why this is the main reference that we have adopted. Now, before we proceed, I want you to reflect on this. What is your stand on this statement? Do you agree or disagree with it? In order for us to know more about science education or multiculturalism, we have to differentiate the terms. What is multiculturalism per se, and what is multicultural education? As you can see here, multiculturalism is a view or perspective that cultures, races, and ethnicities deserve thou special acknowledgement or special recognition. So we'll discuss further why that is. Here, multicultural education naman, as an idea, it seeks to create equal educational opportunities for all students. So it's a movement for students, including those from different racial, ethnic, and social class groups. Multicultural education tries to create equal educational opportunities for all students by changing the total school environment so that it will reflect the diverse cultures and groups within a society and within a nation's classroom. So, multicultural education, as you can see here, is a process or a movement because its goals are ideals that we as teachers or administrators should strive to continually achieve. Now let's go naman sa definition of multiculturalism in social sciences setting versus in the science education literature setting. So, we'll discuss further individually kung ano ang definition of multiculturalism and which definition ang aton nga need to talk about. Now, as we've said earlier, multiculturalism is a view, correct? So multiculturalism in the social sciences point of view is a politics of recognition. Constantly striving to aim, or ang goal nila is for cultures or ethnic beliefs or groups should be recognized. Most of what we know came from the understanding of Charles Taylor, wherein his thesis is that our identity is partly shaped by recognition or its absence, often by the, for example, misrecognition of others. So, as a person or group of people can suffer real damage, real distortion, or if the people or society around them mirror back to them a confining or demeaning or contemptible picture of themselves, nagasuffer ang tao or group of people. Like, for example, ethnic groups. And non-recognition or misrecognition can inflict harm and can also be a form of oppression. So that's why nowadays may mga movement just like Black Lives Matter or fighting for the rights of the LGBTQA, because there is a need for recognition and a need against misrecognition. It can be a form of oppression and imprisoning someone in a false, distorted, and reduced mode of being, nakakapanliit and nakakapanlait, something like that. So, discriminatory. Next is multiculturalism in science education literature point of view, wherein this is, according to Nola and Irzik, an epistemic doctrine or set of epistemic doctrines or cognitive doctrines that form an alternative. It actually go against with universalism. So what we are most concerned of is this multiculturalism in the science education literature, and we'll refer to it as epistemic multiculturalism. Epistemic multiculturalism or multiculturalism and science education, or the multiculturalism in science education, comprises of multiple theories and strategies which are problematic. Why is it problematic? Okay. Now, many multiculturalists in science education believe that their views are incompatible with universalism, not only at the moral but also at the epistemic or cognitive level. Indeed, this is where the battle between multiculturalist and universalist in science education lang. So, multiculturalists typically claim that number one, sciences are disunified. And then both content of the sciences and scientific practices are determined or shaped kuno by social and cultural factors. So sila niya nag-set. And then nature plays kuno little or no role in the production of scientific knowledge. Fourth is science is local, no, contextual, and historically contingent. So that's why lapad, vague ang scope niya or wide ang scope niya. Local daw. And then fifth, every culture has its own science. So that's why wala siya. Science is not value-free but value-dependent, and some go as far as claiming that alternative belief knowledge systems are valid as mainstream science. Now take a look at all of this. So ginhambal this sa number 4, science is local, contextual, historically contingent, and then fifth, every culture has its own science, and then let's jump here. Ang nila, it is as valid as mainstream science. So muna ginapakigbato ni multiculturalism that indigenous knowledge system or traditional ecological knowledge or science should be treated as valid as the mainstream science. Ano ba lang mainstream science? So what we are currently teaching our kids or what we are taught of is the mainstream science. This normally came from the West. So, may tawag na Western science or science from the Western world. Now, gusto ni multiculturalism that ang knowledge from indigenous groups or these particular or let's say various cultures or various ethnic groups should also be considered as valid to be treated kagaya ng mainstream sciences. Now let's look at various definition of science by people who believe in multiculturalism. Here are various definitions from Stanley and Brickhouse, Elkanah, and here sa third one, yani Ogawa. Let's look closely here at the widely endorsed definition by the epistemic multiculturalist Ogawa. Let's read. I shall define science rather simply as a rational perceiving of reality, where perceiving means both the action of constructing reality and the construct of reality. The merit of the use of the word perceiving is that it gives science a dynamic nature. Caution must be taken that the construct of reality involves the peculiar way in which the reality is segmented. So let's try to understand this. So, doka lapad sang sakop ya. So that indigenous knowledge, traditional ecological knowledge, and ethno-sciences in general count as science. Because multiculturalism, amo na ang base niya or foundation, is that for these specific or various cultures or indigenous knowledge to be counted as science. The word perceiving here highlighted is not used in its standard sense, but in a sense of that the action of constructing reality and the construct of reality. So, any rational activity or any activity of constructing reality and what results from it becomes science. So, very broad. So, that's why dalasa ang others. So, Ogawa here seems to confuse science as an activity of constructing theories or models of reality with science as an activity of constructing reality itself. Let's look further here. One may think that the word rational in the phrase rational perceiving in Ogawa's definition might bring some limitation. Kaya diba ano ba lang rational? Diba limited? Do abitang nagiging limited ang definition niya. But actually, pagit siya gani, contribute siya sa pagka-broad because ginbutang niya rational perceiving. Ogawa tells us that rationality should be understood relativistically in a sense that there are as many rationalities as there are cultures. So, namatabo if that is the case. If there are as many rationalities as there are cultures, syempre, there are as many sciences as there are cultures. Kay multiculturalism. Kung ano katamo ang cultures, that's how many man ang dapat tayo consider as sciences, ang ilang mga indigenous beliefs or ang ilang indigenous knowledge system. And let's not forget na may ginatawag pa nga personal science. The obvious problem is that it is broad. It lets in philosophy, mythology, and even religion. Okay, di ba? Once nga may kakuno sang rational perceiving of how we construct reality and the construct of reality. Once it's rational, it's perceived rationally, it's considered science. So masulod gid tungod sa pagka-broad madalas sa si philosophy, mythology, kag diskan ang religion. Kung damo na tanging consider nga indigenous knowledge system, naging consider natin as science, do inflate. So once we inflate the notion of science, it's too costly na. Kaya damo na takinanglan studyhan, damo na takinanglan include, and because damo na, it will be confusing. And what are you going to do with those many information? So it's useless. Not all beliefs count as knowledge unless other conditions are met, which in the classical theory involve dapat ma-justify mo siya or justification of truth. But in other theories, meron pa nga involve a condition such as coherence, reliability, verifiability, falsifiability, kabudlay achieve because dapat kadamo kung sa multicultural perspective. So the question is indigenous knowledge and traditional ecological knowledge science? And whatever your stand on that, do you think it's worthy to be taught at school? So that's it. It's only you who can answer those questions. It defines if in line ka mo sa perspective sa multiculturalism or later, after we talk about universalism, mas makarelate na ako. So ano na siya. And if you said yes, it should be taught at school, paano ka mag-decide if i-include ang mga topics nga i-include mo or i-exclude mo? Okay, so inclusion or exclusion. Now, if Nola and Irzik was asked this, ang ilang answer is not a definite yes or no because they said that their answer is conditional. It all depends on whether or not nga ang indigenous knowledge and traditional knowledge sufficiently resemble standard science. If hindi man kuno hindi pag-i-include sa science education curriculum. But if sufficiently resembles man sa standard science, so it should be included. So in which case, the complaint that they are neglected or excluded from science education is not justified. Though they may be well included in other courses such as, example, cultural studies, diba? History, anthropology. Kaso, hambal ni Charles Taylor kagina, there is a need for recognition mo ang tao kung meron ang need of recognition because absence of recognition or misrecognition or demeaning recognition, like ginamaliit ka or ginamak ka, syempre, it causes real damage sa personality or sa humanity sa isa ka tao or group of people or ethnic group. So that's it. Hambal ni Nola and Irzik, the reason why we have not given a simple yes or no answer, but a conditional one, to the inclusion question is that we simply do not know enough about the indigenous and traditional ecological knowledge system. So for them, we can't just say diretso nga, sige i-include or no, hindi pwede include because we still don't know, para sa akin, we still don't know what we do not know yet, something like that. Nola and Irzik's answer is a conditional one. It all depends whether or not the traditional knowledge sufficiently resemble standard science. So that's it. So nga nabal nila, there is no reason why scientists should not welcome indigenous and traditional ecological knowledge daw if they recognize them as sufficiently similar to the practice of science, correct? Because basic pa lang, we don't know we don't know if it can be included because we don't know enough about that specific culture or specific indigenous knowledge system. Base kung masalihan pa man, kung makita ka nga, this same man ang gali practice with the standard science, kasi dara ka kita makakuha sang ang herbal medicine gali nga ginagamit nila can cure gid man. So scientifically proven gali pag-test gali isang science with that specific indigenous knowledge. Tested and proven gid gali nga makabulong gid man. Example, si unknown herbal medicine or mga medical remedies. So, base, makalid pa sa mga new solutions sa problems natin subong. Now, let's go back here sa statement earlier, sa intro. Drinking hot sa labat. So, whatever it is nga na-decidean mo kagina, you still think the same, you still agree with this, drinking hot sa labat, dinihalin. Because hot sa labat is made from ginger. And it is, di ba para sa aton, it is a practice or it is an indigenous knowledge nga once may ubo ka, for example, mag-inom ka sang luya, pinakuluan nga luya, maayo imo ubo or whatever it is nga problem sa throat, something like that, mga kaos, mga sore throat, di ba? May definitive result siya. So, is it worthy to be taught at school? Amo na siya ang aton nga greatest question there is a science education. An example by Nola and Irzik are the Alaska natives. Their tribe is called the Yupiak. They knew about the behavior and nutritional habits of bowhead whale. Dito ya, legal to ya ang magdako sang bowhead whale because that's their pagkaon, food source na nila ya. So, ang question is what they're doing, is this considered as science? Ang na siya ang question. Are they considered scientists na? It's up to you to answer. The same is true with here sa Philippines. Practice. Meron man kita ginatawag na panulo. So, wala man kita naging-tuduan sa mga scientists nga we should do this, do that para kaya mo niyang most effective na makatakot ka sa fish or whatever that is stranded sa seashore. And it also, here we have a study by Espina, Marine Indigenous Knowledge and Fishing Methods of Fisher Folk. You can visit it here sa link. So, after generations of generations, may gina-practice na ni and na-master ka na man kung anong proper way of how to do it, is what we are doing science. So, the same lang sa example kanina. That's still the question. Is that considered science? And if it is it worthy nga itudlo ni naton? The same or as valid as mainstream science at school? Another example by the book, the reference book, is this quote. In the Americas, traditional scientists, take note of this term, traditional scientists. Traditional scientists developed the long staple cotton and now clothe us and developed food plants that now feed 3/5 of humanity. Itawag pagin sila ganiya ni Snively and Corsilia nga traditional scientists. Are they traditional scientists? Ang answer ni Nola and Irzik, there is a misnomer, or when we say misnomer, sala nga pag-name or sala nga pag-describe, wrong description, that these traditional people or people before were called gintawag siya yan ni Snively and Corsilia as traditional scientists, and then nag-term pagid siya another which is developed. So, according to Nola and Irzik, it is a misnomer, wrong naming, because they are not. Because farmers are not scientists. They are different. Diri masulod ang inclusion versus exclusion. Kagina, ginapapili ta, inclusion or exclusion. Should we include this or exclude this? Now, let's define kung ano ang inclusion and exclusion. It's not as simple as inclusion versus exclusion. For the relativist inclusionist, let's try to read. According to Harding, while the laws of nature discovered by modern sciences that explain how gravity and antibiotics work will have their effects on us regardless of our cultural location, they are not the only possible such universal laws of nature. For Harding, kung naintindihan natin, ang balya, ang mga knowledge na na-produce, or for example, kuno ang gravity and antibiotics, kung universal siya, na correct, or universally intense ang meaning sa mga science topic, may arak ako ng iban that are culturally distinctive sciences, but the problem is wala naging tudlo as mainstream science. That's why wala naging universally known across the globe. Relativist inclusionists argue that science and scientific knowledge are cultural products, and in that they are heavily determined by social and cultural environment in which they are produced. So, ang ilang goal is to include the indigenous knowledge or traditional ecological knowledge systems as mainstream science because there are possible pag nga universal sciences nga ma-produce from that if only we have studied them or if only they are taught as mainstream sciences. For example, gravity is my universal term saya as gravity because gintudo saya as mainstream science. So other cultures have produced specific idea of that knowledge. But with that way of thinking, mapapaisip ka. Are these different descriptions and accounts compatible or incompatible with each other? Diba? So that's why not all inclusionists are relativists because may conflict, do ka problematic as ang approach. So, nagsunod si non-relativist inclusionist. According to non-relativist inclusionists, sciences must be incorporated into science education but with no equal validity in them. So, based on observation, I can say that most of the teachers I know are, or the science teachers I know are non-relativist inclusionists. Maybe ako man. Because in a sense nga, ginatudlo naton ang indigenous knowledge system somehow. For example, sa case ko, I am teaching science, technology, and society. So I have a topic guide specific for indigenous knowledge system. Ginatudlo ko ang traditional ecological knowledge, but not without the same intensity or weight sa pagtudlo ko sa mainstream science. So, wala ko no sang equal validity in them. And sometimes, ginagamit na ang indigenous knowledge in order to give contextual or localized examples. So, muna, maybe, personally, I belong to non-relativist inclusionists. So, it's up to you if you agree with this or not. That's why relativist and non-relativist inclusionists complement each other. So, ang kakulangan nga or ang confusion nga gindala sa imo sang beliefs sang relativist inclusionist or ang mga hindi ka agree with it, napunan siya ni non-relativist inclusionist. Lastly, exclusionist. Very simple. Exclusionists believe nga hindi gid pwede. They do not agree to the position nga indigenous and traditional ecological belief systems should not be considered as science, and therefore it should not be included sa science education curriculum. So that's it. It's up to you whether you are a relativist inclusionist, non-relativist inclusionist, or if you are an exclusionist. As I've said, our main reading or the main reference for this topic is Philosophy, Science, Education, and Culture by Nola and Irzik, and I've added here the reference from this reference book. So if you want to cross-reference whatever we have talked about here, you just visit each of these if you want to learn more. So that's it for me today. Universalism and Science and Values will be discussed in the part 2 by Mames.